illusion, a figment of the mind, nothing more than the horror of nonsense, an hallucination.
What kind of really sold it to you? What was the point that you said?
Well, he said, thank you. We're composed of hands and legs and arms. And he was basically saying, look, God cannot be divided. And I said, well, if he is all loving, omniscience, omnipotent, and omnipresent, then these are three concepts which can be divided like three body parts, for example. So God is not a totality, he's actually composed of different things.
Do you believe in God after that?
I mean, I struggle to understand how for me it's a very contradictory idea. God is a very contradictory idea. And if you analyze the key aspects that compose God, for example, he's all knowing, but yet if he is all knowing, how can he know what it is like to not know something? Or if he is all powerful, can he reduce his power? There are things like these which lead me to a very agnostic position, and certainly more on the atheistic side.
Okay, well, I like the fact that you haven't classified yourself as an atheist, because atheism, again, generally people define it as a position of certainty. But Gnosticism is somewhat the opposite. I don't know. And I like that. I think that's intellectually honest, especially when it comes to God and the likes. My name is Zishan, by the way. Stralbro.
Yes.
You're going to have to spell that for me.
It's S-T-R-A-B-O. Strabo.
Yes. Okay, fantastic.
Bang
Strabo.
on, yes.
Okay, that's a very unique name.
It is, yeah.
Where's the origins of that name?
It's a Greek name.
Okay, wow. Strabro. Strabro.
Yeah. I think my dad was mildly obsessed with classical civilization and probably a little drunk at the time. That's where the name comes from.
I like it. It'll keep me on my feet to remember Strabro. So, Strabro, what do you think about the contingency argument?
The contingency, I love it because it's a very ancient line of reasoning and it's been developed. And can you remind me of its raw idea?
Sure.
Yeah.
So Strabro very basically just means that you're dependent on something else, that's dependent on something else, that's dependent on something else, and you can't have an infinite regress of dependencies. So at the end of the chain, there is a necessary existence.
Yes.
So the only way that somebody can necessarily disprove this is by stating that you can have an infinite regress, which again goes against the definition of infinite. It goes against the nature of our existence as well, which is...
Sorry, I wanted to clarify something. You said that in order to exist, you need to continually depend upon something else. Could you explain that idea a bit more, please?
So, for example, you're Strabro, you depend on something. Could be sustenance.
Or oxygen.
Yeah, oxygen, sustenance, the sun, whatnot. That thing in itself depends on something. That thing that it depends on depends something. So either there's an end to that chain, or there's an infinite regress.
The thing is, if you carry on.
So I guess what I'm saying is, what's the
solution?
What's the inference to the best explanation?
Well, there has to be an unmoved mover, something at the foundation.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very persuasive argument. But the only issue I have with it is when you take our universe, the universe is space and time. And if you go outside of the universe, there is no space for something to be caused, for a cause and effect to occur, and there is no time for that process to occur. And at that point, you realise that our concepts just break down. We cannot actually fathom what such a state would look like beyond space and time. So to talk about whether there was an infinite regress or there wasn't beyond the universe is a very unknown realm of human understanding. And I'm personally not in a position, nor is anyone else, to really assess anything with certainty about that status.
I mean, you're unaware of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle as well, I'm assuming.
I mean, I know of it, but
Yeah.
I never did physics properly.
Yeah, no worries, but in the sense that nothing is certain. And he, obviously, Karl Popper and him were somewhat loggerheads, even though they pretty much, they were very
I
kind
like
of...
Karl Popper.
Yeah, exactly. So his thing is that of falsification, but also that as scientists we need to continue and we need to keep looking for what is around us and whatnot, but we can't say anything definitely because there is always something that we can come across that will overwrite what our previous understanding. So falsification, or the problem of induction, as it were. So it's the same, but that doesn't stop us from doing science. And that's why I use the term inference to the best explanation, because that's all we can really do. Like you said, we don't know something that's unknown, but we do know that there are certain things, like the law of non-contradiction, like that. We know that exists. We know that that has to exist. And then when a person says no, what created the universe could be illogical, that's what it then kind of goes to. But my thing is even more fundamental. It's something that can be understood by everybody, which is dependency. Even if you look at space and time, that's dependent on something else. And that thing still depends on something else. It's not necessarily a cosmological argument, like cause and effect. This is more to do with dependency.
I like these kind of conversations because we're talking about the God of philosophers. Like this is the thing is though, whenever I've read a holy text, I've read the Quran and the Bible, and I've been to church. I went to a mosque once, very beautiful, yes, in Cairo, one of those magnificent architectural buildings I've ever experienced. And I really wish, if there was a God, he would tell me I was sort of on the right path. I'd feel a deep spiritual yearning. But to be very honest with you, when I read these texts, I do not feel that spiritual awakening within me. And either God has not provided me with that sensation, that experience yet. I've tried to be very open, but it's just not come. And I'm led to this thing. If there was a God, he would have.
He would have done it now.
He would have endowed us with this sense that we are, when we're on his path, we're on the right path. But I do not feel that when I.
Strawbro, do you think it could be that the word that I use "yet" hasn't happened yet, but it could happen in the future?
I'm very open to that possibility.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, time is of the essence.
Of course.
Time is very much of the essence, and if you really believe in
are you okay here, or should we move a little bit because there's a big crowd?
I mean, I don't mind whatever you feel more.
I should move. That's a bit dead, isn't it? Yeah. Let's just move a bit over here so you guys can just change the angle. Oh, I agree with you in the sense that time is definitely of the essence, and but bear in mind when we just rely on physical sensations are predicated by our society. They're predicated on our current mood, and they can be manipulated as well. You can drink a can of Coke, you can feel very good. That doesn't mean it's good for you. That doesn't mean you're doing the right thing. Do you see? But it's definitely, I would say, it's a form of measurement. It shouldn't be the form of measurement.
Yes.
The other forms of measurement should be, and feel free to jump in, it should be, of course, evidence, objective evidence, be it historical, deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, philosophical evidence, testimony, and then you have it all together. But my argument to you would be, I can tell you certain ways that you can experience these things. Yeah, there are. Do you see why I made you move? Because it was kicking off.
I really was.
Yeah, it was kicking off.
but I'm so glad we possess the ability to speak and we possess language. Otherwise, that would be the only way to resolve all debates. This be so fucked as a species. It'd be like the Tower of Babylon, when everyone suddenly loses the ability to form a mutual language.
Yeah. So here's the thing, Strawborough. When it comes to the infinite regress, when people say, you know what, we don't know what's outside, but then that point is presented of, okay, this argument or that argument, and then a person says, I can't be that though, it can't be that, then that is also a knowledge claim, which requires, obviously, then the burden of proofs on that person to say, why can't it be this or why can't it be that? So that's why I admired your position of agnosticism.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If we're having a very open conversation about this, when I hear that God has determined everything which is going to happen, and then I'm born in a secular family in a Western country, it's very unlikely that I'm ever really going to convert to Islam. So I'm a condemned man. I'm actually going to go to Jahannam. And I think that's a terrible shame.
You said Jahannam.
Jahannam.
Yeah, you know why that's really interesting? Because Jahannam is the combination of Jannah and Jahannam. You've combined both words. It's as if you're in the middle, just like your stance of God, which you're not certain of God and you're not uncertain of God.
What does Jahannam?
You actually used the right word.
What did I say before? What does that mean?
Yeah, so you said Jahannam is technically not a word, but you've combined two words together.
Oh, right.
Which is Jannah and Jahannam.
Oh, right.
So which I thought was ironic.
Thank you. But no, yeah.
So Strawborough, we will come to the. Yeah, so we'll come to the kind of, because where you brought to the scene is determinism and compatibilism, and we're dealing with and free will, of course, which is that's a separate kind of discussion.
Yes,
we can kind of jump into that, but even before we jump into that, so you have no issue, like you're talking about the philosopher's God, like, and that's absolutely fine. The necessary existence, something which is even entertained in modal logic, Leibniz, Aristotle, Hume. So this is something that is not alien to philosophers, it's not alien to people like Avicenna and Ghazali and the likes.
I'm studying them at uni at the moment.
Fantastic, you're really going to love it.
They're very good, yeah.
And when it comes to the contingency argument, it's the only way around it is to say that there is an infinite regress. That's the only way around it. And when a person says the infinite regress, what you're necessarily saying is, okay, so because I'm sure you agree, time is linear and it continues. Movements, they are continuing.
I know that I perceive the world in that way. I don't know what is really going on behind the veil of perception, beyond the veil of perception.
But the very basic, you understand that time is progressing.
I'm not a total skeptic.
Yeah.
I think there is some time.
Yeah. Then you are a solipsist.
Yeah, wait, get away.
Yeah, exactly. So even in terms of movements, like the movements that we're doing, we're adding, isn't it? Yeah. So infinity, by definition, you can't add to infinity. So by addition of time and movements, you're contradicting infinity.
May I say, why did you think my solution was inadequate? The idea that if we carry on going back and back, we hit the Big Bang, and before the Big Bang there was no space, no time, so there's no universe, and in that state we can't actually speak about that state because we can't even fathom it. So what would you say to someone with that argument?
Well, what I would say is it's the same that the people at the time of steady state theory would be saying. It's the same that the people at a time where they believe in Newtonian physics would be saying, which is at that particular moment in time, that's the dominant theory. It doesn't make it fact, it doesn't make it the theory that we now base everything upon, because science is predicated primarily on induction, isn't it? Yeah. So you're going to study, or maybe you have done, it's called the problem of induction by David Hume.
It's a very interesting problem. But you're saying that God necessarily needs to be posited to prevent an infinite regress.
Yes. And
I'm saying that there is a theory whereby the infinite regress is not actually an issue. In theory.
Yeah. But I guess, just to complete what I was saying, it's that even Big Bang telling us that there is a beginning and that's when space-time came. Yes, we've got cosmic background radiation and we've got the likes. However, tomorrow you ask any scientist if we get, can we get evidence to the contrary? The answer would be yes. Can that theory undergo a paradigm shift? Of course it can. So any theory in science can undergo paradigm shifts, can undergo changes. So for us to rely on induction, rely on our current scientific understanding, what I'm saying is that...
Hi, Straven. Yeah, I'll come back if you've got any questions. Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm saying that relying on science to give us something concrete is actually unscientific. In the sense that we're more, because science relies on induction, I'm saying why don't we rely on deduction? Deductive reasoning is something which is more airtight than induction. Wouldn't you say?
I do agree with that. But the thing with deduction is that I could say, look, I don't know, all unicorns have horns. There is a unicorn, therefore it must have a horn. So, but I'm just playing with language and concepts, and that's no reflection on reality. So, although the reasoning,
the reason why that's false, just to jump in there.
Actually, it's not sound.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I wanted to say. It's valid, but it's not sound. We want something that's valid and sound.
But you know, like for me, I don't want to sound insulting. But for me, God is just as conceptual as a unicorn, essentially. When I hear a deduction for God's existence, I just hear a series of words and concepts which have been tied together, this beautiful form of human reason, but they are just concepts.
And that's fair enough. Yeah. Just like when a hypothesis put forward in science, it's just a concept, it's just words. The only way you give that credence is by induction, by looking for evidence.
Finding something physical.
Yeah, so that science primarily relies on the physical, but not only. For example, many of the things we actually can't see, like feelings, consciousness, dreams. We see the effects of it, but we don't see the things themselves.
We live in such an interesting state where our concepts mesh with physical reality. So we talk of power or love, and then we paint something and put that concept into the object. But it's this very strange mesh of the two. And I mean, you are right. I'm not saying that it's purely physical, because that's how humans do not understand the world in a purely physical way.
Yeah.
We'd be lost if we did. And God is not a physical concept. I've never seen him manifest in a physical object. So I'm not saying that because he is non-physical, he therefore cannot exist. I'm merely saying that there's just a profound lack of sound evidence. And when you actually look at the concept of God, you find so many different contradictions that I'm unfortunately forced to just back away from that position. Because, I mean, this is how a conversation started. The very definition of divine being all powerful, being all loving, these are things that humans do, which have been extended.
So you mentioned some really wonderful points.
Sorry, yes, yeah.
So So with evidence, the reason, because I want to kind of determine when you say lack of evidence for God, what are you defining as evidence?
That's a very good question. If I saw with my eyes a divine messenger, then I would certainly believe God.
Okay, so seeing is yeah.
No, and I just think like someone with power, like the concept of power, that is an idea which exists within our minds and exists within language. And for me, God is the same as such.
You're definitely right in the sense that we have an innate disposition to believe in a God, which was proven, of course, by Justin Barrett of Oxford, where he did that comprehensive study. So we definitely are innately disposed to believing in a God. that doesn't necessarily mean that. Were you thinking of God of the Gaps or?
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. I think I mean, are we disposed to believe in a God?
Yeah. That's you can check that study out. It's by Justin Barrett, and it was done as a very comprehensive study, and he concluded that we are born with a natural disposition in believing in a God.
Do you think lots of false idols, from your perspective, emerge because a group wants to find some glue, some moral glue to bind them together?
Yes, and that's why I say that don't just rely on empirical evidence, because even empirical evidence has its limits. Yeah, I would say empirical evidence, testimony, deductive reasoning, inductive reasoning, philosophical evidences, and scaffold them, and then come to the inference to the best explanation. So just like that gentleman that walked past, he's a Christian, probably.
Yes.
So you'll probably speak to him, and he's going to give you the Christian perspective, and I think you're looking forward to it.
No.
Oh, okay, maybe not. So, but one thing, Strabra, because you're in the park, and I've seen you from a distance a couple of times, and of course, great minds think alike. I'll tell you that there are certain things that, if you compare, say, certain theologies with Islam is completely and totally different, especially in terms of evidences. Yeah. For example, let's just say, because you did kind of say that, okay, necessary existence isn't much of an issue. Even if we talked about a few kind of characteristics of a necessary existence, it being independent, eternal, powerful, having will, they're not outlandish. Would you agree?
They're not.
So then we move on to the next step, which is, if there is scripture, if God is, all-knowing, then how would he disseminate knowledge to us, like you said, to help us with our, to determine morality, and how do we live a good existence. So now we look at what's common amongst all the faiths, and his books, his holy books, which does make logically the best sense how God would disseminate knowledge to us, because verbally, if he just gave it to you, you might die, you might fall ill, you might be able to...
Yeah, I know where you're coming from, but before Islam... And before,
so I guess what I was going to say, Strabra, was, if there are these books, what would be your criteria, and what criteria would you have to accept something to be a book of God?
I cannot answer that fully, but I would say one thing. Before these books were composed, Greek and Roman philosophers and Indian philosophers, they created these moral systems, these moral blueprints on how we should live our lives, and how we should be governed, and how we should conduct ourselves. And there's a lot in their works which is compatible with Christian and I think Islamic morality. Not entirely sure, but I imagine so. And I've read Aristotle, and I was deeply inspired by his words. And that's his, and I definitely am falling far short of some kind of vision of human flourishing. But I feel like if I really embody what his values and what he subscribes, then I could live a very good, happy existence, and a moral existence as well. And that is a very secular moral scaffolding as well. So yeah, I guess.
But that would be a misconception of what the Quran is. The Quran isn't just morality. It doesn't just give you morals. It gives you ways on dealing with society. It teaches politics. It also has waqiyas or events of history which can be objectively measured as well. There's prophecies. There's a falsification test in there. That's why even when you speak to other people, you notice that the same can't be said for other scriptures. What the Quran has is head and shoulders above the rest. Yeah, it's unique and it's special. Even if, for example, the numerical evidence, Muhammad, peace be upon him, somebody who was unlettered, somebody who we know historically, he was in the desert, and he was, again, he was amongst a certain amount of people, and the Quran was revealed circumstantially. Yeah, it's not in prose form like page 1 is the beginning and the last page is the end. It's done circumstantially.
And especially the hadith, it's actually a blueprint on how to build a state and how to their laws and even tax laws and marriage. And so it's
Straba, think about this, because I was studying, I was looking into inheritance a couple of days ago. British law, in fact, talks about inheritance. Your mother and your father don't get anything. Islam is the only inheritance law that gives something to your mother and father as well. When you look at, for example,
so when you say inheritance,
when you pass away.
When you pass away, but in order to inherit something, your parents need to die first, surely.
No, if you die, then your estate, a portion of that estate can go to your parents, your wife, your children.
Right. So I'm no lawyer, but in British law, say I wrote a will, and I said I'm going to leave everything to my mother and father. Can I do that?
I don't know if you're coming from a secular perspective, but I know as a Muslim, you can say that my inheritance is according to Islamic law, which is this much goes to my wife, this much this much that, and yeah, that's allowed.
Because the thing is, if you sort of sincerely believe in Islam, then I imagine you think that the doctrines of the Hadith should be installed. You know, in Britain. I mean, it's I don't know. Is that, like, I don't want to sort of, you know. I'm just curious.
Put like an ICG on me. Yeah.
I'm just curious. Yeah.
So there's a verse in the Quran which says that there's no compulsion in the religion. I.e., you don't forcibly convert somebody, you don't forcibly put your ideals on somebody. That's why you'll see, I'll come to the park, I'll be speaking to you, I'll be debating with you, we'll be going back and forth. There'll never be force involved. There'll be never coercion involved. Even if you're in a Muslim country, even if you're in a caliphate as well, there's no forced conversion or reversion.
The tax for non-Muslims.
Yes.
In the Ottoman Empire. The jizya, yes.
The jizya, yeah. So
the Ottoman Empire was a very tolerant empire.
Yeah.
But maybe not later on, but for most of its history.
The Ottoman Empire definitely.
Well, I mean, it had its moments, but you know, all
which
empires
empire doesn't?
Exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
I mean, you're not going to forge an empire in peace and love, brotherhood. It will be forged through blood and war, as the British Empire was, as all major empires were.
What's interesting to know about the jizya is money that you pay to the state, but the Muslims pay something called the zakat.
Yeah.
And the zakat is actually more than the jizya. That's the first point to consider. Second thing to consider is jizya is not to be paid if, for example, say you're a widow, or if you're an ill person, you're a disabled person, you're an older man. And thirdly, the jizya is, the whole point of the jizya is if you're living under Muslims and the Muslims are under attack, Muslims cannot force non-Muslims to fight alongside them. So that protection, as long as the Muslims can protect the non-Muslims, they will accept the jizya. However, there have been precedents where the jizya has been returned and the Muslims have said, you know what, we can't promise protection to you, so take the jizya back, and if we're successful, we'll come back, then join us again. Otherwise, here it is. So there's a precedent that's been set about the purpose of jizya. Jizya is seen to be, there's tax. No one's going to come to your house, bang down your door.
No, don't. Yeah. Oh, no, I'm not. No,
I know, but especially in the park, some people.
Some people like this sort of fear mongering.
They do.
And I just want to explore your intellectual position, which I find fascinating. And I think it's very important that you don't exist in an echo chamber of own moral beliefs, otherwise you will become shackled to them. And so I'm very grateful for your time, that you've it's been a very fruitful conversation.
Very glad to hear that, Strawberry.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
And let me know how long you have, because I don't want to hold you against your will as well.
No, I'm here very willingly.
Because I think I was speaking to somebody else, and sometimes when you have to go somewhere and you're being very polite. So I guess what I'm saying is, even when you look at scripture, you've got the Old Testament of the Jews, New Testament of the Christians.
Oh yes. So what would you say about these earlier secular writers like Aristotle and Plato? you didn't have the divine word to guide them, and they kind of created their own moral system, because their moral system, some of